Hello and welcome back to Stu Structures. We're here for video 12 in the series of building the Beanery, so stay tuned. Okay, so in this video 12 of building the Beanery, we're going to get into several little projects that we've already started. We're going to come back through. When I put the windows in the walls, I mean, it's common sense. I didn't really feel like it was necessary to show you how to glue windows in walls, so I didn't do that. I just mounted them in the walls. But in the process, when I was coming through, I noticed that there are some hairline cracks where the windows meet the walls in some areas. And I want to come back and fill those in with glue. And there's one little tool that I like using to do that with, and it's a tool that's self-made, and I want to show you how I made that tool. Hopefully it'll come in handy for you and maybe help you get into some of these little tiny areas as well to glue things. There's art tools out there on the market that you can do it with. I just happen to like this tool and I do use it. We're also going to work on the standing seams for the end roof of the first two-story building out there that we had the roof together for, and we're going to work some more on the cornice work underneath the tower roof. And I don't know, we'll see what else we get into in this video after that, and let's just get started. The first thing I want to finish is all the standing seams on this roof from the first two-story building that we did. And I'm just doing this the same way as I did the tower roof. I broke out my scale rule here and I'm just coming back and marking 2 foot on centers where the seams will come up the roof. And I'm doing this before I go into any of the installation of anything, because I don't want any of those little seams to be in the way when I'm coming through and marking anything. And so just marking both sides and the end of this. Some roofs have different sizes of standing seams. I just decided to go with the 2 foot on this. I'm not really sure, but looking at the picture, exactly what the sizes were on these seams, but they're close to 2 foot. And once they're all marked, I come back with the square and make sure that the lines are all square with the edge of the roof. When I glue all these pieces on here, I want them to be, you know, really parallel going up through. I don't want some areas to be wider than others, so I measure everything and do this. And the first thing I do is come back and glue on these ridge lines. I do the 2 at the V on the end and the 1 long one at the top. You see I got to come back and cut them off yet, but in doing this, it used up what stock I had of that particular type of styrene. And calling around to everybody that carries it, I really need about 10 packages of this number 120 evergreen styrene, and nobody had that many on hand. So I decided to come back with that sign, which is a really thin piece of styrene, and just cut strips. And I didn't go through and measure all these. I just marked or came through with a knife and just cut tons of them. And as I was going through and using them here, I just made sure that you know, I got the thinnest, because there's a few that are just a hair wider than the others. So I made sure I got all the really nice thin ones that are evenly sized throughout. I just come back and use some of that glue and follow my lines and just glue them all into place. Now I did make these just a hair wide when I cut them, so they do stick out at the ends, and I come back and cut those off, and here you can see all of those standing seams are in place, and we've got one more chore finished with at this point. Now the next thing I'm going to come back and work on here is gluing all these pieces that I molded, the scrolled little wooden pieces underneath the eaves of this tower. So first, you know, I showed this in the last video, but I'm just coming back and marking where those are going to go on the plastic. There's 5 down the center of the wall, and then out on each of the corners there's 1 that sits out at a 45-degree angle from the corner. So I'm just coming through and marking all 4 sides as to where all the placement of all those will be, and then just coming back here and just checking the placement, make sure that the piece is going to fit the way I meant it to, and kind of get an idea of how they're going to set on there before I start putting glue on stuff. That way I know if something's wrong up front, I can take care of the problem before I have a bunch of glue on there and I have a mess I have to deal with. Now what I'm using for this is an epoxy. The only epoxy I have at the moment is this 30-minute set time epoxy. I wish I had something a little bit quicker. But it's kind of the similar process to mixing as we did with the resins, although this is 50-50 of the hardener and the resin, and you mix them both. I just have these little cups that I got from when I was in a hospital that have graded lines on the sides of the cups, so I know I'm getting, you know, equal amounts of each of those. And then just coming back and stirring it up once again, same as the resin, trying not to get a whole lot of air bubbles and stuff down in it, just taking my time and getting all that in there. And then I just hold the pieces in a tool and apply just a little bit of epoxy to the edge of those, and then I come back here and start working them into place. Now the epoxy is a little soft on these, and like I said, it has a 30-minute set time, and I wish I had something a little faster because I'm sitting here having to play with these for a little longer than I would like to get them to set up to where I can move on to the next one. But it is a good glue for mounting the polyester to the styrene. And here's one side completed, so you can see all that worked out fairly well. The tops are level for adding our next board onto it, so I'm just going to go ahead and continue and do all four sides of these and get them all mounted on there the way they need to be. And you know, here's a finished view of all of that. I'm really pleased with the way these came out. There's a couple that may be just slightly cockeyed, and the way I'm made these, they don't fit perfectly, but I'm going to go with it. So we're going to come back and start working on the cornice to this building too. The pieces that we put on there before were just the basic structure. So there's some more smaller pieces that come up and form the gutter, and in that first little clip there you saw me measuring how wide I wanted to make those, and they just stick out a little beyond the board underneath, but there's a big gap behind that starts to form the gutter. And so now we're just starting to glue all those pieces in place. I'm not going to go into this into a lot of detail because it's just the same as all the other cornice work we did on the building. And then after the first piece goes on, we start here with the second piece, which just stair steps out from that first piece underneath just a little bit. And I'm not doing 45s on any of these, but here you can see the finished product of those next two boards added onto the cornice work. And on to another project. We're just coming back and putting standing seams on this shed roof on the building 2. I just used more of these strips that I just cut off a sheet. Before I started this clip, I had already put down the standing seam where the two roofs meet in this, and I just come back and add all these small ones. I do also add a piece where the brick meets the roof and the standing seam in that corner to kind of hide that joint. And then here the lighting doesn't allow it to be seen really well, but there's the finished product. And on to another project. One thing I was talking about earlier in one of the videos was having to come back and fill in the gaps between these windows. Now I do like this Tamiya glue because it's a nice thick glue, and you can come back on the back side of the windows and just use the brush applicator with the bottle and back drag glue into those joints. Now that does fill up the majority of the joint, but when you turn the building over and look at it, you can still see some gaps in the front side. So I wanted something that I could put glue down in these little tiny cracks from the front and not get glue all over everything. Now I have one of these from before, but I'm going to come back here and make a couple of them just to show you how easy it is. And what I'm doing here is just cutting wooden dowel to make two little handles. And I cut them to lengths that are comfortable for me. You can use any size wooden dowel you want to. I'm marking the centers here because I have to drill a hole down in these a little way to set these sewing needles. And basically what I do is I find sewing needles that have real long eyelets in them, and I cut off the very end to open up that eyelet on the end. And here I'm doing two different sizes, one that's really small and one that's a good bit larger. And once I have those eyelets cut off, I come back and I drill the handles out in a hole. And then once I get that nice and deep, you know, also looking at the drill bit size, you want something that's just a hair smaller than the diameter of the needle. And here I'm just turning the wood dowel as I drill it to make sure I'm getting a straight hole and not coming out into the side of the wood somewhere. But then I just put the needle down in there and drive it down into the wood carefully, so I'm not breaking the two little points on the prongs on the end of the needle up there. Now there's lots of other things you can use to put glue in. I use the syringes once in a great while, but this glue's a little thick, and brushes are going to create a mess. They do make glass tubes and things on the market to use for putting the glue in, but this is a free little tool, and I really like it. And here I'm using the real fine needle, and I'm just dipping it in the bottle. And as I come up out, I make sure there's no glue on the outside of the edge, and the only glue is between the two prongs of that eyelet from the needle, and it's full of glue. And I just find these little tiny crevices that I need to fill in, and I'm just taking this needle and sticking it down in there, and the capillary action draws the glue out into the crack. And then once we're done with going around the windows and doing that, we're going to start on another one of the little chores we need to do. We're going to start putting the flat plastic on all the tops of these pieces that are glued on for the cornice work in the tower. So here I'm just measuring how wide I want the flat piece to be. I want it to come out and clear all these little pieces by just a little bit. So I measure the length, and I remember I have to measure it wide because I've got to go clear out to those 45s on the far corners. So I'm just cutting back here and cutting 4 strips that will I can cut all 4 of those pieces out of, and I'm using the slightly heavier sign stock for this. The tops of those pieces are fairly even, but I want to give it a little more rigidity, and some of that thin plastic is just a little too thin for this, so I decided to use the thicker plastic for this first piece. And then once I get all 4 pieces cut, I just need to come back here and mark the angles, and I'm going to do a 45-degree angle on all the corners of these, but I need to mark all of the lengths with the 45s as a secondary process. So I'm just going to come back here and cut every one of these lengths at the ends to 45 degrees and get one end of all of them cut. And then once I have that done, I can come back and mark each one of them individually on the building, because there may be some slight variance in lengths from one side to the other of this building. It may be very minute, and it may not be a lot that it's really noticeable, but if you pre-cut them all to the same length, you may have one that just is too short, or another one that maybe is just slightly too long. And then I come back and just lay one of these pieces and get the 45 that I have cut tight to the corner and mark real tight where the other corner's 45 begins. And then I get out my angle here and mark that 45 and come back and cut it off. And once I get that all cut, then we'll just place it on there and make sure that it fits, and then glue it in place. It's just a long, tedious process for each individual side, and you just need to do each one of the 4 as an individual process. And here you can see the first one is glued on, and it's actually, you know, it fits really well here. So I'm going to come back and do all 4 of the others individually. And then once that's done and all 4 of them are on, it comes to this, and we have nice tight joints in the corners. Underneath all those little cornice scrolled pieces, there is some little gaps in them here and there that we're going to have to come back in at some point and fill just some open areas with some glue before we do the painting. But all in all, I'm really pleased with how this turned out. So there you have video 12 of building the Beanery. We got several little things accomplished in this segment. There's still a lot of little things to do on this building that we'll get into on the next one. there's just tons and tons of things. I've got a lot of little projects going on all at the same time, which makes it easy to let things set while the glue dries or paint dries or whatever. You can be working on something else and not having to go waste time doing other things that aren't associated with the building. So it makes a lot of things come together quick at one time when they finally do come together. It was nice to get some of these little chores out of the way in this one. I hope you enjoyed that little new tool that I showed you. I mean, that's been around for years. Somebody showed me that years and years ago, and I know I've seen another video on it, but it's just a nice tool for getting glue into small places when you need it, and it's just a freebie. If you can raid your wife's sewing kit and steal a needle and have a little piece of wood to stick it into, you can make one of these easy enough. So in any case, I appreciate you coming back and watching my videos. Stay tuned for the next one. We've got a lot of things going on with this building for quite a while yet. Like and share these videos. There's a lot of people out there who would like to know how to build prototypical buildings, and some of these little steps may not make sense to them, and hopefully this will help somebody to be able to do some of those things. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Right underneath this video there's a little red button that says subscribe. You just hit that button and you're subscribed to my channel. And there's a little bell next to that. If you hit the bell, then you're notified every time a new video comes out in this series, and you can keep up with what's going on. So anyway, once again, thank you for coming back and sharing my videos and this time with me. I think this is probably going to be released right after Christmas, so I hope you had a nice Christmas. I hope you got all the trains and toys that you wanted for Christmas. Mine was a very calm and quiet Christmas. I kind of like that, and I'm getting plenty of time to spend on my buildings with all the bad weather we're getting. Probably for the next couple months, I'm going to be spending a lot of time building and doing things, and then probably get back into the rush of life. But in any case, Happy New Year. If you're going out and celebrating for the New Year, please be safe. I'd like to see all of you back in the chats and hangouts and things that we share in this model railroad community after the New Year. And once again, happy model railroading.